Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to begin here in just 1 second. If everybody could take their seats. We're very grateful to all of you that have shown up in person, and we'd also like to extend our warm welcome to our live stream audience that's tuning in online. Thank you all very much for being with us. There's really no question that this year has been a very daunting year for America. In January, of course, our nation came under the direction of a new president after a hotly contested election that has left lingering questions in the minds of millions. Through the winter, we lived under this new administration and a slew of coronavirus-related mask mandates instituted at all levels of government, from the municipal government to the state government, and even instituted by many private companies. Well, the spring did bring some respite from these mandates. During the spring, we saw key sectors of the American economy fall victim to cyber attacks, while there were rumors of inflation. Of course, now as we round out the summer, we're seeing that inflation come to fruition. The middle class, the lower class are feeling the impacts of that in an outsized way. And of course, President Joe Biden has rolled out what is effectively a federal vaccine mandate for all workers. After all of these confusing events, an ancient Greek adage is starting to ring very true for many Americans, and that is, even if you don't care about politics, politics will take an interest in you. The events of this last year have been a bucket of cold water poured over the heads of those who are still asleep, who are not playing an active role in the preservation of this nation. And yes, while this time has left many people in despair, it has also lit a fire that has lit passion in many more. With us tonight are Kim Crockett and Ned Ryun, who will help lend some clarity to the murky waters that we find ourselves in, explaining what it is we're up against and what needs to be done next. Kim is an attorney with decades of experience with the Minnesota think tank, the Center of the American Experiment. She then became the vice president and general counsel for the Charlemagne Institute, which is based here in Minnesota and publishes both Chronicles and Intellectual Takeout. She also worked in a legal capacity with the Wisconsin recounts and the January 4th runoff, two very historic events. She will speak tonight about what you can do as Congress is attempting to impose new controls over elections. She will explain why this is an important issue and what can be done to help preserve freedom. We will also hear from Ned Ryun, who is an expert in grassroots activism. He founded American Majority and remains at the helm of that organization today, identifying and molding the next generation of liberty-minded candidates, activists, and community leaders. Ned will explain how the average person can impact positive change, actualizing their values in an increasingly hostile political climate that's characterized by high barriers to entry. Before I yield the stage to our speakers, one logistical note we'd like to address is note cards. Many of you have received note cards. If you haven't, they'll be passed around. If you have a question that you would like to ask either of our speakers, please write it on the note card and they'll get passed up to the stage. So without further ado, Kim Crockett. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, actually, Ned's going to start the evening.
Do you want me to start? I'll start.
Yeah,
Sure.
They
No, I
get to hear me
want
all
to set the
time.
table before. We really want to have a conversation and just really bring you up to speed on some of the things that are taking place and some of the things that you can do. But I want to set the table for where we're at today. And what we've done with American Majority, and we've been around 13 years. We've trained in all 50 states. We're nearing 60,000 people total trained, of which about 10% are candidates at the state and local level. I'm a huge believer in state and local politics. I believe that's where the national generational change comes from. But this year we decided, after the very highly suspect 2020 elections, that one of the biggest themes of our training this year was going to be on election integrity and election reform. Because I'm here to tell you, whatever the media wants to tell you about 2020, whatever the left, the Democrats, everybody wants, there was nothing unusual about it. It was all kosher. No, it wasn't. The 2020 elections, they even admitted it. And I usually ask when I go out and speak about this, how many of you have read the Time article from February of this year? Raise your hands, please. I have a copy of it. They admitted in this article in February to fortifying the elections, and they proudly proclaimed all of the real collusion that took place between the unions, between Mark Zuckerberg's Center for Tech and Civic Life, between the Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to tell you the Chamber of Commerce, if you haven't figured it out, is not your friend, in which they worked in changing laws. Mark Elias, does that name ring a bell to you? I would say the Steele dossier. Of course, you probably recognize the Steele dossier and Fusion GPS. He was involved in that. But Mark Elias is known, obviously, he really kind of got his start up here in Minnesota, right, with the Senate race in 2008. He is known as an expert in changing election laws to rig them and manipulate them to get the cases that he wants to favor the Democrats. And so starting in 2019, Mark Elias had about 300 lawsuits across the country to the tune of the real figure is probably $100 million that he got to use and spend on these lawsuits to get what he wanted to really dismantle the integrity of our election process, going after photo ID laws, going after absentee ballot signature requirements, a whole litany of things that really loosened up the integrity of the process. So I tell people, when people say, oh no, 2020 was fine, it all was done free and fair. No, it wasn't. They admitted to it in the Time magazine article. And again, if you have not read that, please read it. That's your homework assignment either tonight or tomorrow, that you have to read the February Time magazine article, because it's not me saying this. It's them. Them actually admitting to what they did in 2020. So what we're doing with America Majority is informing people. This is what happened. Read the Time magazine article, but also go look at what Mark Elias did, but also look at what Mark Zuckerberg did. Are you guys familiar with the Center for Tech and Civic Life? Yes? $350 million into this kind of sleepy nonprofit. 99.5% of that money that they spent on their coronavirus safe elections project was spent in battleground states, primarily in blue counties and in blue cities. As I would say, they were spending all this money in these blue counties and blue cities to boost the blue votes, and sometimes by a margin of 10-1. The worst part about what Center for Tech and Civic Life, and again, think about $350 million being spent by a private outside nonprofit to manipulate elections in battleground states that would decide the presidential race. They were sending money grants to these counties and these cities with strings attached. Center for Tech and Civic Life basically took over the election process in a lot of these key cities and key counties, like Green Bay. They sent $16 million to Cobb, Gwinnett, and Fulton County in Georgia, counties in Georgia. $16 million, in which they're basically funding the whole entire election process with strings attached, and if the process is not followed to the letter of the law according to the grant, they were going to pull the money. So they basically took over how the election process was run. If you want to know more about Center for Tech and Civic Life, it's run by former alumni of the New Organizing Institute, far left progressives, some of whom were involved with Obama's campaigns. But this was run by the left. They knew what they were doing. They spent their money. And I tell people all the time, if it was me, Ned Ryan, America Majority, doing what they did, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be in prison. So this is kind of what we're up against, in which we're up against very powerful forces that rigged and manipulated election to get the results they wanted. So when everybody tells you, no, that's not true, yes, it is true. They've admitted to it. They skirted state laws, they skirted state constitutions. They didn't annihilate, they bulldozed them and acted as though they didn't exist. And this is something that we'll probably talk about in more detail. The un-American left and the Democratic Party are one and the same, all right? They have taken over the Democratic Party from within, and they have one pursuit. They have a lust for power. They will do anything that they can to seize power, to take power, and to hold power. And Kim's going to talk a little bit about H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, which I have termed codifying the corruption of 2020. They want to make sure that there will never be free and fair elections again in this country. This is what we're up against. But I want to give you hope, now that I've given you a relatively grim picture. All of this in the 2020 elections, do you really know what the deciding vote total was in the 2020 elections that decided the White House? It's about 42,000 votes. By the time you add up Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona, those roughly 42,000 votes, those electoral votes go from Biden to Trump. It's 269 to 269. And then it goes to the U.S. House of Representatives, where Republicans had, you vote by state delegation, they would have had the votes to actually put Trump back in the White House. So despite everything that they did, they literally threw the kitchen sink at Donald Trump. They rigged, they manipulated, they did everything they could to get the outcomes that they wanted. They still narrowly pulled it off. Now, what's incumbent upon us here today and tonight is to actually say, are we going to let this happen again? And this is why we're doing this with American Majority. There's others that are also talking about election integrity. But we have to decide we're never going to let this happen again. We're going to make sure that we become informed on it. We're going to make sure that we know exactly what they did in 2020, and we're going to do our best to say we're going to have real election reform at the various states, Iowa, Florida, Texas. Some of these states have already passed great election reform this year. I think there's going to be more states that are going to pass it next year before the 2022 elections. And I'm convinced that if we can actually toe the line, and each one of us does our part, and we'll talk more about action later, we could actually have a replay of 2010 in 2022. And let me remind you what happened in 2010. Republicans took 63 House seats, and they took 6 Senate seats. So I think we could have a replay if we do everything that we're supposed to do before the 2022 elections, and we have to. Because if we don't, if we just sit here and say, well, somebody else is going to do that work, and I tell people this all the time, if you think that some cavalry is going to come charging over the hill to save you, I have a memo for you. They're not. The people that are going to save you are sitting next to you, and it's yourself. Look in the mirror. You actually have to decide, and this is one of my challenges, and we'll talk more about this again later. You have to decide that over the next, for sure, 18 months, you're going to go above and beyond what you've done in the past. And I'll just give you a little bit of an example what we're doing in Loudoun County. That's where I live in Northern Virginia, the Loudoun County School Board. Right? I've got a lot going on in life, but my staff and I in Virginia have decided we're going to be a part of the recall effort, collecting signatures to recall these school board members because I've got kids that are in the public school system. I've done the whole gamut. I've done private school, I've done public school, I've done homeschooling. We've put them back into the public school, but I'm like, we're going to take out the school board because I have kids that are in this school system now. They're pushing transgender, they're pushing CRT, and right now we've got at least 2 of them that are recalled. We're going after 3 more. We were going to go after 4 more. The one passed away. She was recalled by a higher power. But we're going after 3 more. And here's the thing that I have for you guys. Too often in life, we're too busy. Politics is not our religion, right? I would say we're all kind of political junkies or we wouldn't be here tonight, but it's not our religion, right? We have family, we have jobs, we have hobbies. For the left, it is their religion. And they approach politics as a religion, and the administrative state is their holy of holies, by which they will actually bring nirvana and utopia here on earth. But I'm here to tell you, their progressivism always ends in authoritarianism, as we're starting to see especially now. Mandates for vaccines, which are not backed up by science and the data, by the way. So we have to meet these religious zealots with our own passion. And I'm telling you, we have to take it up a notch. And we have to decide, we're either going to run for office, we're either going to do voter registration, we're going to be an election judge, anything that we can do over the next 18 months, each one of you deciding, I am actually going to do something. And if enough of us do that across the country, I think we can turn the tide, hold the line. And I'm the eternal optimist. I believe in some ways what we're seeing, this lashing out, almost feels like they are realizing they're being backed into a corner. They realize that if they don't change the election laws to hold on to power, that there is going to be a serious backlash next year. And that's why we have to take advantage of it and be ready for it to actually seize the moment. So I'll close my comments by saying this. This really is why American Majority. We want to train people how to win. I think so often we as conservatives get enraptured with our ideas. We have great ideas, but ideas that are not implemented are just great conversations. And what the left has figured out is politics is policy. We're going to organize to win politically. We're going to be great on strategy, and they are, and they're great on tactics. They're also great on breaking the rules. But we have to be just as good at strategy and tactics and organizing and political warfare. And if we are, that's what we do at American Majority. We can win. I'm convinced of it. I'm convinced that there are more of us than there are of them. They've just been doing more of the right things than we have. So the last thing I'll say is this. As we move forward, your challenge again is to go home and to think about what am I prepared to do moving forward. So Kim.
So one of the reasons I love American Majority, Ned Ryun, is Ned. After the 2020 election, and if you've been listening to me on radio and reading anything I've written, I've said this so many times, people think I said it, but it was Dinesh D'Souza. What happened at 2020? And he answered, well, Republicans focus on campaigns, but Democrats focus on elections, right? And the reason why I love Ned Ryun and his organization, and I'm happy to be working with them here in Minnesota and perhaps elsewhere, is that Ned's been focusing on elections and the grassroots of citizenship in the country. So his team with Lonnie Leitner and Jennifer DeJornette and others here focus on getting people registered to vote, helping candidates who want to run for office, all the things that we want to talk about, and now training people to be election judges. And all of those things are key. And let me fill in some data points from the overview that Ned gave you for Minnesota specifically. Center for Tech and Civic Life, Mark Zuckerberg, bad guy. He spent more than Congress, folks, on elections, more than the congressional bill that came out on because of COVID, right? In the takeover. And just as to give you an example, he spent gave over $2 million to the city of Minneapolis. And that was part of how we got all the ballot boxes. So while there's this push, ballot harvesting is supposed to be illegal, right, in Minnesota. But while there's this push for mass balloting in the metro area, we have suppression of the vote going on in greater Minnesota, because over the last several decades, you guys aren't aware of this, but rural Minnesota or greater Minnesota has been pushed to mail-in balloting, where they get a ballot in the mail, hopefully, and are expected to put it in the mail. They don't have ballot boxes. So those are some of the things that are going on here for Center for Tech and Civic Life. And as for Mark Elias and the Democracy Docket, which is a massive DNC law firm, he is best known for the Steele dossier. And by the way, he's been forced out of his firm for some reason, which is interesting.
It is interesting.
Mark Elias is another bad guy. And Secretary Steve Simon, our Secretary of State, yes, boo, cut a deal with the DNC. Mark Elias came into our state pretending to sue the secretary and said, you got to get rid of some of your election integrity measures because of COVID, or because they discriminate against this, that, and the other group. And Steve Simon said, oh, stop it. Okay, I'm being sued. Okay, let's cut a deal. And it was called a consent decree. I call it a collusive consent decree, whereby our Secretary of State, without the nuisance of legislation and the nuisance of legislators, some of whom are here tonight, or even the governor's signature, agreed to basically three things. They extended the election for 7 days, past November 3rd. They waived the requirement that we have postmarks on the absentee ballots and the signature on absentee ballots that is normally required to verify that the voter is who she says she is. So just to bring it to Minnesota, that's what happened here. And they cut the deal with the permission of a Ramsey County judge. Guess what her resume includes? Former political director for Amy Klobuchar in the state of Minnesota. I think the three of them went out for drinks afterwards and celebrated.
The other thing that we have to be very bold about, first of all, in addressing the 2020 elections, as I already mentioned, we have to be very bold in addressing what Democrats are working on, the un-American left. Anybody that wants to do away with photo IDs, the absentee ballot signature requirements, wants to have universal mail-in ballots, doesn't want to clean the voter rolls, wants to do all these things that Kim just said, wants to extend election day into election weeks, they're doing it for one reason, because they want to cheat. And I think we need to be far more honest about that. They want to say that photo ID is voter suppression. No, we just want free and fair elections. We want to have the integrity of the vote. But we should be calling them out, and we should not be afraid to say, anybody that wants to see these things happen and is working towards that, you're doing it because you want to cheat.
Can we stop calling it shenanigans?
Yeah, we should stop calling it shenanigans, and we should be very blunt about this and say, no, you cannot cheat. We have to have free and fair elections in which all of the American people can get back to trusting the process. Win or lose, they can at least say those election results were valid. And we are definitely not at that point in this country right now.
One question I'm always left with in this discussion is, how did we end up in this position? What went wrong from the camp of people that want election integrity, that they were able to install all of their cronies throughout the system for decades to get to the point where they can brazenly fortify an election and we can't do anything about it? Because it seems like we should have been able to see this one coming down the pipe for a pretty long time, but we got blindsided in 2020. What happened?
Well, you give the general, and I'll bring it to Minnesota.
I'll give you some of the general.
Yeah.
The RNC did not do what they should have done. Let's be honest, they didn't. Trump campaign did not do what it should have done. They got caught by surprise, even though Harmeet Dillon, who's part of the RNC, was actually warning them beginning of January of 2019. Hey, they're on the move. Mark Elias is on the move. There's going to be some things happening over the next 18 months. They did not really pay attention as they should have. So that was part of it. Mark Elias and the Democrats, they know what they want. In some ways, and I say this in all honesty, I kind of admire them because they know what they want. They played by the rules, and they rigged and they manipulated through the legal process to get what they wanted. They spent $100 million, but they played by the rules. And we could have done the same thing, and we didn't. And so part of it is they stole a march on us, because we didn't take it seriously enough until it was too late. And it was kind of summer of 2020 that people started waking up and realizing we might have a problem here. I don't think people understood how significant a problem until it was too late. And so it's one of those things that the problem with Republicans and conservatives as a whole is we are reactive instead of proactive, and the left is extremely proactive. And they're always one step ahead of us, and we're always reacting to what they're doing. And one of the things I want to do with American Majority is we've got to be very proactive and put them on the defensive, because that's what they're doing with us all the time.
What's this look like at the state level here in Minnesota?
Well, I think part of what you asked isn't just 2020, and I totally agree with you that
Administrative state.
that conservatives were too trusting. Though, before I forget, let me point out, if you look at a map of the United States, and for those of you who hang out with me, if I have my cell phone on me, I'll pull it out and I'll show you a map. How many of you have seen that map from me in conversation? The middle of the country is very red. It's very conservative. I think the whole country is more conservative than the map reflects. But remember, 2020 happened, but a lot of good things happened too at the state level. So if you're discouraged, remember that there are huge parts of the country where I think there still is voter integrity and voters are being counted. This isn't one of those states. And I'm sorry guys, Debbie Downer, we've got work to do here, and this goes back to his question, which is over time, right? You said decades. Well, do you remember Joan Grow, Secretary of State? Some of you are too young or you didn't live here. But Joan Grow was this admired, lovely Secretary of State for like 20 years in Minnesota. And she took us from a state that had really good voting laws, voter ID, none of this, no provisional ballots. Absentee balloting was very limited in circumstances to a very progressive state. And we never really recovered from that during the Kiffmeyer years. And then when Mark Ritchie came in, and now Steve Simon, it really didn't matter who was governor, under Pawlenty or anyone else. The laws just kept getting sloppier and sloppier. So other than California, we're probably the state with the least amount of integrity, and so we've got a ton of work to do here. We've been very naive, and I'll just say it too, frankly, the conservative politicians in this state haven't been willing to risk their seats or risk their majority. A lot of promises made, right? Oh, we're going to get you this, we're going to get you voter ID, whatever. Nope, it's always promises and no delivery on getting that back. And it's almost as if elected officials, even though they're in the business of elections, don't understand how our laws work. And I'm sure that that's a story of blue states, but I do want to assure you that there's still stuff out in red states where things are pretty good.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you guys want to see bright spots, look at what Iowa's done, look what Florida's done, look at what Texas have done in regards to election integrity. And they've passed, I mean, remember the whole situation where Texas legislators left the state, 30 some of them said
They flew to D.C.
They still passed it. They passed this bill down in Texas, and it's phenomenal. I mean, this is what we want to see. I think there's 23 trifectas, meaning Republican governor, state Senate majority, state House majority. We should have all of this in 23 states before 2022. I don't think we will get to all 23 of them, but I think we could probably see another dozen or more next year before 2022, passing laws that I think are going to ensure the integrity of the process. So there are bright spots. It's just we need more bright spots, and we need people to be aggressive. The last thing I'll say this on the whole, too often we're disappointed by Republicans not fighting. I wish more of them would actually take a page from Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump didn't accept the premise. I don't believe anything you're saying. I don't believe the media. I don't believe anything that you're saying, and push back on almost every front. Don't we all wish there were a few more mean tweets right now, right? The problem with most Republicans in D.C. is that they don't fight. They send out a strongly worded tweet. They'll send out a strongly worded letter when they actually do have some recourse to actually make life difficult for Democrats in the House and the Senate. And yet they're not doing it. And so one of the things I want to see, obviously, with American Majority is we're recruiting more fighters at all levels. People that are going to say, we're not going to accept the premise, we're not going to accept the argument, and we're going to fight them at every step, tooth and nail.
So you mentioned 2022 as sort of an optimistic deadline. I think we'd all like to reclaim free and fair elections by 2022, but as you said, that's a pretty daunting challenge. Of course, the people gathered here today and people everywhere can start working immediately on these measures, and we'll get into that later. But what do you think, sort of from a macro strategic perspective, is a realistic timeline? Because it's taken a long time to get this corrupt. How long does it take to clean house, in your opinion?
Yeah, no, I tell people this all the time. I think everybody wants the silver bullet, right? The quick fix. I'm here to tell you there's no silver bullet in politics, right? We didn't get here overnight. I would argue this has been really building for the last 100 years, the rise of the progressives, early 20th century. So I tell people you've got to be realistic. This isn't 1 or 2 election cycles, 3, 4, 5, 6, of us doing the right things, getting the right people in who are then implementing the right policies, us keeping their feet to the fire, and building and building and building, and pushing back. So, yeah, I keep on telling people, be prepared for the fight for 3, 4, 5, 6 election cycles of us having success every step of the way, right? Because there'll be setbacks. So it's not an overnight fix, but it's one of those things. I'm truly convinced there is no final victory in politics, being realistic, but we can get the high ground, and we can hold the high ground for generations. I'm convinced of that, and we can have a golden age.
It seems like what you're describing isn't so much a single battle or one push. It's more of like a political lifestyle, kind of a way of life that the right needs to learn, that the left has had for a long time. I think earlier you compared it to a religion. It
is. It's 24/7. I mean, this is one of the things where, as Dinesh was saying and you were just quoting, we focus so much on the election day. And my dad said this one time. I was walking down the street with him, and this is one of the memories I always have. He was in his last term in Congress. He was very frustrated about some bill that was just taking place. And he was really getting beat up by the left with a lot of calls, people calling into the office, really taking shots at him. And he goes, the problem is our people come and go. They show up in the last 6 months and they disappear for a year and a half. Evil never sleeps. And he was referring to the left. And this is the one thing where we have to understand this entire process is not, we work for 6 months before Election Day and then we disappear for a year and a half. It has to become a 24/7, 365 days a year, year after year, in which we're doing a little bit of something. And I almost call it I'm evangelical. It's almost the 10% tithe toward politics. 10% of our time spent on something every day, every week, doing something to actually bring about political change for the good of the country, for the good of our children, for the good of our grandchildren. So we need to have that mindset. I'm not asking for a wholesale lifestyle change, but I am asking for something of a daily and weekly commitment to making change happen.
Looking at these note cards, I think people agree with you. There's a lot of these questions here, people asking what specifically those things are, or what those practices are.
Before we get to that, let me follow up on that. I spent a lot of time I worked really hard on the campaign in 2020. And I was one of those people that ran into the buzzsaw of denial on what Elias was doing. I'll tell you some stories, I'm not going to share them tonight, of where I was just shocked by the ineptitude, the sloppiness, the mediocrity of conservatives in politics, where they were just phoning it in.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of good buds that we had a lot of dinner parties. We called them peaceful protests, I think, or peaceful demonstrations in my dining room. And the debate was, do we stay in politics or do we go fight the culture war? Because that's part of what's going on. And one of my good buddies has decided to focus on the culture war. I'm staying focused on elections, because it's our basic civil right. It's like when an airplane's going down, what happens? The oxygen masks pop down. And you put them on because you can't save, like if your kids are there, you can't save them if you can't breathe. Well, that's voter integrity. That's elections. It's the oxygen of our system. So this is a long way of getting around to, for those of you who struggle with politics, think of it as biblical citizenship. I'm a woman of faith as well, and it's that tithing notion.
Right.
We're not going to hear this from the pulpit, right, Ned? I mean, maybe your church does, you're a lucky guy.
I got to tell you, we go to Cornerstone in Leesburg. Gary Hammer.
I'm familiar with it.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
But he addresses the political issues from the before we get to the action items, I really kind of want you to delve into a little bit of HR 1 and HR 4, because this is important to understand what they're trying to do, and they're going to be pushing again. They're going to be going after the filibuster, trying to remove it to get some of these ridiculous election reform bills passed. But kind of give them a little bit on HR 1.
Yeah, and I have a little bit of intel from I'm part of a national coalition. Here's some good news. So I was disgusted by what I saw at the war, in 2020. Since then, I've seen a lot of RNC lawyers and other people on the inside eating a lot of crow. I saw some humbleness at a legal conference in Atlanta that was thrilling to see. They sat there and they said, we screwed up. We didn't see the problem coming, right? So there's good things happening on that front. But the Biden administration and Pelosi and Schumer are hell-bent on making sure that they have a permanent majority. And for those of you who read Alpha News or American Greatness, those are the two places where I publish the most, I've been talking about HR 1. Who knows about HR 1? And HR 4. Good, this is a pretty educated audience. And the filibuster. So the only thing standing between us and election integrity and a complete federal takeover of elections is the filibuster and Senator Joe Manchin and Sinema. Let's give Kirsten Sinema.
Which is kind of a scary place to be.
Right. She's an interesting cat. Yeah. So they are going to use the argument that conservatives in Texas, Arizona, Georgia, other states, didn't happen here in Minnesota. All those reforms, those election integrity measures that were passed since 2020 are being sold as voter suppression, as racist, which is insane. But that's an accusation that Americans have a really hard time dealing with when they get accused of that. They actually expanded voter opportunities in places like Georgia, but they tightened up things like ballot boxes and that kind of thing. So that's what they're using to argue that Congress under HR 1 should run federal elections. Or if they can't put Congress in charge, that the Department of Justice under HR 4 should. Those are kind of the thumb sketches of those. And I was surprised because as of last week, when everybody went to sleep in DC over the weekend, we were thinking HR 4 was up in the Senate this week. Well, HR 1 is back. and it's called the Manchin Bill. He was the Secretary of State in West Virginia before he became governor and before he became a U.S. Senator. And I think he has some pride as a former Secretary of State to know that, he ran a pretty tight ship there. Right. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution delegates the administration of elections to state legislatures. Congress said, we're not going to try to run federal elections. And they reserved some power, right, as Congress, but they said the states need to handle it. We've been voting on our own since before 1789 when the Constitution came into play. So there's this aggressive assault on us. When we were abandoning American citizens and troops to danger in Afghanistan on August 23rd and 24th, what was Nancy Pelosi doing? She demanded that the House convene for 2 days in Washington, D.C., and this is just a couple weeks ago, and jammed through H.R. 1. Did you notice it? You heard about the infrastructure bill, you heard about the $3.5 trillion spending resolution, but you didn't hear about the attempted takeover of elections. And forget that it's unconstitutional. Don't expect the court to save our bacon, because this is a court that they're threatening to pack, right? We want to win the political fight before we ask the Supremes to save us. So when we wake up yesterday, it turns out that Joe Manchin and our very own Amy Klobuchar had been very busy over the weekend coming up with what's called the Manchin Bill. And it's a new version of H.R. 1 that would still be a takeover of elections so that the state of Texas, Minnesota, California, doesn't matter, all of our election laws would be taken over by Congress. They would decide what our election rules are. It would also affect redistricting and political donations and a whole bunch of other things. So that's a live thing. And apparently, over the last week, the Senate committee met. Manchin wouldn't go to the meeting, even though it's got his name on it. It's the Manchin bill. Klobuchar's name is on it. Senator Amy Klobuchar. And as I wrote the other day, it's almost as if the Democrats have gotten tired of democracy. They're tired of this. They don't want to have to convince you to vote for their ideas or to vote for them. Ned has a favorite saying. What do they think of us? We're
the dirty little peasants.
We're the dirty
Shut
little
up
peasants.
and listen to what we say.
Yeah.
But this is the ultimate end of progressivism,
Right.
is authoritarianism. They're
Right.
done with democracy. I will say this, there are Republicans in D.C. that are also done with democracy. They're part of the ruling class. But this is what we're up against. They have finally, I think, gotten tired over the last 100 years. Dirty little peasants aren't moving fast enough, haven't accepted the premise, haven't accepted the experts as the oracles of God. And if you're not going to accept it out of your own free will, we're going to force you into compliance. So I think we're headed towards, I think, a very interesting, they're not going to stop. I'm just here to tell you, over the next, 13, 14 months before the next elections, they are going to be pushing very hard to try and make this all a reality because they feel like they are backed into a corner. This is their shot.
Right,
and
this
if they
is their
don't
shot.
solidify power,
Biden has said,
it might be a long time before they
You tell me
get
when
it
I
back.
start making the phone calls.
Yeah.
He doesn't care if it's H.R. 1 or H.R. 4, but they want a federal takeover of elections. And I know it seems crazy for you to call up the senators that where you don't live, but I've been calling Manchin's office for months. Yeah. And do call Klobuchar, do call Smith, and tell them that you don't understand why they wouldn't defend the right of Minnesotans to make their own election laws through their own legislature. And where is Governor Walz? Where is Secretary Simon? Where is Attorney General Keith Ellison? They're all in favor of this. Hammer them. That's your job as citizens, to hammer them.
That's a really good question. I think I see your note card here. Somebody wrote in and asked, what difference does it really make, not to quote Hillary Clinton, but what difference does it make if you call these people? And this is something we discussed previously.
Does
but
it
you know,
really matter?
it seems like the whole system thrives on making us feel disenfranchised, making us feel like dirty little peasants.
Right.
And I've been left wondering that myself too, is what difference does it make if we write an article or get on the school board or call your representative? Does it have any impact at all?
Yeah, it does, actually. I understand completely the dynamics of some of what's taking place in Minnesota. At the same time, to be silent is to basically say you're in agreement with what's taking place. And I would probably say 99.9% of us are not in agreement with what is taking place, but we're silent. And I think one of the things we have to do is let our voices be heard as many places as possible, as many times as possible. But the thing that you have to remember, one of the basic things, most politicians are experts in self-preservation, and if they think that there are enough people that might end their political lives, they do respond.
Yeah,
I'm here to tell you,
told
I've seen it all the time in D.C., where sadly a lot of people who you would hope would be principled conservatives, it took a lot of grassroots pressure for them to do the right thing, because they thought if I don't do the right thing, I might be voted out of office the next time. So it does have an impact, and sometimes it does feel like you're running uphill, but I'm telling you, it will leave a mark.
Right, and the Washington Post has reported that they think this federal takeover attempt is actually stalling, and that's as of in the last 24 hours. So there's good news. I've been asking all of you through Alpha and other places to call a list of senators, including our own, and I'm just telling you this effort is stalling. You told a story this morning on Justice and Drew about what your dad said about phone calls versus letters.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit. My dad was in the House for 10 years, and I always tell people, the more effort you put into lobbying your officials, the more impact it has. So we've all seen those pre-printed postcards, whatever, emails, kind of whatever. It's the live personal visits or the live calls that really have the impact, especially if it's somebody from their district or state. Because then all of a sudden, and it's a minimal number. With my dad's office, it'd be 10, 15, maybe 20 phone calls on the same issue on one given day for a congressional district. And all of a sudden, they kind of made the calculation that was probably one for every 200 people that felt the exact same way. So something's clearly going on. We need to address this issue. So I tell people all the time, it's very nice if you want to send an email. It's far more impactful to make a live call into the office and let your voice be heard, especially if you're in that congressional district. I'm a registered voter. I either agree or don't agree with this, and I want to make sure that my voice is heard. You have to make those calls. Even more impactful is obviously being able to visit in person, either in the district office or in the DC office, and showing up in person saying, I'm an actual constituent, I'm a voter, and I'm here to actually lobby you on this issue. And I have the ability to vote. I have other people back in the district that vote as well, and you have to hear us and listen to our concerns. So it does have an impact, but I tell people, sending an email might feel good, but the impact is minimal. Live phone call, please. It actually has a massive impact on these guys, because all of a sudden they realize there might be hundreds of people that feel the same way that just simply didn't pick up the phone to make that call.
That's another good question.
Typically, you're going to end up talking to the staff assistants, and they register the votes.
A 20-year-old?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to register. What they would keep is they keep a sheet. You know, the issue, yes, no, for, against. And they do look, I mean, they'll tally them up and go, hey, we just got X number of calls of people that were supporting this and X number of calls of people against it, all of whom are registered voters, constituents in the district. So they keep a tally. What was the question? Even the libs do that? Yeah, yes. They're keeping track, because they actually are like, what's going on in the district? What are people actually talking about? And again, go back to, most of them are experts in self-preservation. Some are truly crazy. Ilhan Omar, but there are a lot of people that are, doing this. So it does have an impact, and they keep track.
Well, what's funny is you mentioned who are you going to talk to, the 20-year-olds. I can confirm that. I've got lots of these young 20-year-old friends that work out in the Hill, and they tell me this is their job. They respond to constituent concerns, they make a spreadsheet, they report it to somebody in like the little front office, and they report it to the legislator. Yep. And that is their entire function in the office, is to help the politician gauge the wind. And if they're going to be there, you might as well bother them. I think it's an important message.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we have here from one of our viewers is about what people can do do to reverse more deep state corruption? So if you've got somebody like, I don't know, Steve Simon and his cronies, and they're doing something where you can't call, their office as easily, or they're not as susceptible to legislative pressure or electoral pressure, what do you do there?
You want me to go first? Part of it's transparency. A lot of the reason these guys get away with this because nobody's watching, nobody's paying attention, nobody's talking about it. A lot of these people despise transparency. They don't want people to really know what's going on. So I encourage people, obviously, we've got to get to the point where we're doing more writing about what's going on to inform people this is what's actually happening. If you really get down to brass tacks and how we dismantle, obviously we got a political power back. I tell people this all the time. They ask me, well, how are we going to get back to normal, Ned? We're going to get back to normal by seizing political power and beating the left into unconditional surrender. That's how we're going to get back to normal. That's all they understand. That's all they understand is they want power, and if they don't have power, we have to beat them into submission. So that's how you're going to devolve power ultimately. But in the meantime, it's all about transparency. And this is one of the things I've actually advocated, and give me 30 seconds to kind of riff on something. What the left has done very, very well against us has been doing this investigative journalism and going after people on the right, conservative organizations, all of that. I want to do the exact same to them. And my hope is that someday we can get together an organization where there's small, lightweight outfits of 2 to 3 investigative reporters, all picking targets and making their lives miserable, but providing transparency and saying, this is what they're trying to do. This is the one thing that frustrates me. I'm just going to go off here. On the conservative movement and Republicans, we're too nice. Like, this is the future of the Republic. This is the future of our Constitution, the future of the Republic, the future of a free America. And we're a freeborn people, and a lot of us are just sitting here going, a lot of Republicans are just saying, holy cow, people. I might use stronger terms in private, but it's time to fight. And it's time to fight by all the means that are laid out for us, by the means laid out by our founders, and we're sitting here wringing our hands not knowing what to do, and we've got to play nice, we've got to play by the rules.
No more playing nice.
No more playing nice. No, absolutely not. They have, besides, they made the rules. All we're going to do is play by the rules they laid out. But it's time that we actually got a little bit of that fighting spirit in us and said we believe so strongly. Again, the founders of this free American republic believed they had been given rights by God, right? Our natural inherent rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but so many rights you can't really spell them all out, even in a constitution. They believed they'd been given these rights by our Creator. No earthly power had given them. No earthly power could revoke them. But even more so, they believed they had a right to defend those rights. And even more than that, they believed they had an obligation to. So why do we not seem to think we have an obligation to defend our rights at every step by legal, peaceful means that have been laid out by our founders, by our process? It's time that we actually got a little bit of that founding spirit back inside of us and said, no, we're not accepting this. I'm going to fight. I don't care what you call me, right? I used to do a lot of MSNBC and CNN. I actually enjoyed it probably 90% of the time. But it would always be like 3 Democrats, the host versus me. And I had a blast 90% of the time. But I always called everything in the book on social media, on Twitter, right? One time my wife, she's driving down the road and I'm reading my Twitter feed to her. Well, I didn't realize she had it on speaker with all the kids in the car. I was dying laughing. This stuff kind of this fuels me, right? You can call me anything and it's like, yeah, bring it. I'm Scots Irish. I was reading her all the comments, very colorful ones, and all of a sudden halfway through I'm like, do you have me on speakerphone? Yes. Are the kids in the car? Yes. As I've just literally read, 20 F-bombs and you racist, you fascist, whatever, the usual. It's very boring. I'm like, you guys got to come up with something new. I even say that on Twitter too. I'm like, you know what? This is getting really old. Nazi, whatever. I don't mean to be crass. Someone like, I hope you get ass cancer and die. I'm like, now that's original, right? Good for you. I actually tweeted back at him. I'm like, thank you for coming up with an original insult. Nazi was getting really old. But you all need to have that same attitude. They're going to call you everything in the book as you actually stand your ground and say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. You white racist bigots, you misogynists, whatever, you fascists. None of it's true. Yeah, right, none of it's true. So why would you even for a moment accept the premise of what they're calling you? It's a lie. Still don't accept it. And just expect it and go, that's funny. That's really cute. I'm not stopping.
So I think what Ned has just demonstrated is that we have to kind of embrace where we are and have some fun.
Yeah.
Right, this is where we are. And I've always loved the American Revolution, and now I get to live through the second one. So
Yeah, exactly.
let's have fun. And let's have each other's backs. You know, not everyone can be out front, right, on the line, but if you know someone who is, someone who's running for office or whatever it is that they're trying to do, have their back. See what you can do to be supportive of them. And yeah, let's not be long-faced, and let's be happy warriors. Ned's a happy warrior. He's a good model.
Most of the time.
Yeah. So once people have sort of resolved to do something, they've decided that they're okay with the names, they've figured out where they are in history and what they need to do, what are the next tangible steps? Because it seems like people are pretty fired up and they need marching orders.
So I was talking today at Knights of Columbus. It was a great gathering. I think about 100 people were there. And talking through some of the second phase of election integrity. We have a three-step series on election integrity. One's kind of explaining what happened with some action items. The second one is more action items, and the third one's really going to deal with election judges. So I was doing part 2. And there are 100 people in the room. There's more here tonight. And which I said, you as a group have incredible power if you will actually decide to approach this in a very systematic way, in a very metric-driven way. So I proposed, and I'll go out and do American majority training still. I was just in Warrenton, Virginia, and I said, I was in Warrenton, Virginia a couple weeks ago, group of 25 people, in which I said there's 3 things that I really wish you could do. And what you need to do is decide you're going to take these 3 projects, you're going to have somebody in charge of each one of these 3 buckets. You're going to recruit people to be involved in those 3 projects. And the first one was, here in Minnesota, there are election judges, right? You guys need to decide, are we going to be election judges? So I tell this to the groups, all right, you're going to recruit 10 election judges out of your group. People are going to sign up, they're going to go through the training, they're going to be election judges. The next bucket was voter registration. The left does this very successfully. They've been very sophisticated in going into these battleground states. And if you do voter registration 9 to 12 months beforehand, those newly registered voters, for the most part, about 80% of them, will be super voters. They'll vote in the next election. So if you're sophisticated about doing your voter registration and the timing of it, you'll get people out to vote in that next election. So I would argue here in Minnesota, you should decide, we're going to go register, 10 of us are going to sign up to be voter registration people, and we're going to each register 10 to 20 people. That's another action item. The other one that I'm working on is, how do you start going through and cleaning voter rolls and making sure we have clean data? Dirty data leads to dirty elections. So again, I will tell you, if somebody doesn't want to have their voter rolls clean, there's a reason for that. If you have dirty data and a lot of people that shouldn't be on the voter rolls, and you're wanting to do universal mail-in, there's one reason they want to do that, is because they want to cheat. And it's incumbent upon us to be involved in actually pointing out that person that's 125 probably shouldn't be on the voter rolls. Probably is deceased. And so Jennifer's been doing some great stuff. Jennifer's with us here in American Majority and doing a great postcard project in which they've been going through voter rolls, and they've been sending out these cool little, what do you call them, sunshine and lollipop? Sunshine and lollipop. Hey, we just want to invite you to our next Republican women's meeting. We think it'd be great if you came. Testing to see if anybody actually still resides at that residence. And they're getting back postcards saying, this person no longer returned to sender, but this person's still on the voter rolls in Minnesota. So there's things that you guys can do. And so with this group in Warrenton, I said, election officials, voter registration, going through precinct by precinct. And so they're in Fauquier County in Virginia. There's 17 precincts. And so their project's going to be, we're going to go through precinct by precinct, and we're going to go through the rolls, and we're going to test and see how many people are still on the voter rolls that shouldn't be there. And there's another project that's coming out that's going to make it a little bit easier called VoteRef, in which they're trying to upload every precinct in America into the database so people can look up their precincts and go through line by line and say, this is questionable, this is questionable, and this is questionable. And people ask, does that really make that big a deal? I see your hand. Hold on a second. We'll have the question in just a second. If you were to go through and say 5 to 10 people in every precinct shouldn't be on those voter rolls, do you know how many local elections I have seen decided by 5 votes, 10 votes, less than 20? I've seen congressional races decided by 123 votes total. It makes a big difference. And you start adding up precinct by precinct across a state, and it starts to add up in a big way. And so I tell people, election integrity, obviously election judges, voter registration, cleaning the data. There's a quick question in the back. You really have a question? you continue to actually promote and actually show the data. I mean, this is the one thing. They can continue to stonewall. But it's one of those things that I'm convinced the more we talk about it, the more we write pieces about it, the more we show data again and again and again. I mean, it starts to add and build momentum. Do I think that it'll ultimately be successful? I mean, Simon's probably going to fight tooth and nail to make sure nothing ever happens.
Right.
But at the same time, there does become this crescendo at some point where people are going to go, hey, why are you fighting so hard to not clean the voter rolls?
But there's a way that you can help. And this is one of the key things about Minnesota and what I'm going to ask you to consider doing, why I want you to think about being election judges. And if you're signed up here tonight, I can follow up with you. We have a 46-day voting season. It's something we need to get rid of, and let's work on that. But in the meantime, we have a 46-day voting season. It's a really long time to cheat. And it's been extended by 7 in 2020. We'll see if that happens again. So we have a ballot board. 1.9 million votes out of 3.2 in 2020 in Minnesota were cast by absentee ballot. I need you to sign up for and train as election judges, and we need to figure out a way to get you on the ballot boards. And Minnesota Voters Alliance has actually been at the forefront of that, and we can follow up after tonight with how we do that, because the counties are now in charge of absentee ballots instead of your trustworthy city clerks. And then there's election day judges as well. So there's 2 opportunities there. They're both paid positions. You know, one is short term. It's a 20-hour day or something. But the really critical one is to get you on the ballot boards, because state law requires party balance. Just like in the precinct, there's a Republican and a Democrat sitting there keeping one another honest, right? Well, Steve Simon has declared war on honesty on the ballot boards and told counties, oh, you don't have to do that. Well, yes, they do under the law, and I think most county auditors want to follow the law. And if we have enough election judges like you, trained and ready to go, and we can tell the county auditors you're available, over time, I think we can fix that problem, and that will go a long way towards solving some of the lack of confidence that we have in the outcome.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, we're kind of coming down to the end of our time here, so we just have one more concluding question for each of you. The first one is for you, Kim. Somebody here who really doesn't like the current Secretary of State is wondering if you would ever consider running for that position.
Wasn't planning, I promise.
It's under consideration.
See, there you go.
Very good. Absolutely. My next question is a very practical question. People understand what jobs need to be filled. Who can they specifically contact to get rolling? I know you've got some program managers that are doing various things around Minnesota. Who should they reach out to?
Well, we've got Jennifer, she's over here, and then we've got Lonnie, who's also over there. Lonnie, come out so people can see you. These are the 2 full-time American majority staff here in Minnesota. So those would be the 2 people to connect with, not only for training, and we do a whole variety of training, whether it's running for office, whether it's activism, whether it's election integrity, but we also have a C4, American Majority Action, where people can put some of these skills into action and be involved in the process and do a lot of fun things, doors, phones, all of that. But yeah, I was just going to close with just by saying, please, when you go home, you have to determine, what am I going to do moving forward? Okay, this is something that each one of us, and we're going to start doing pledge cards again at American Majority. Used to do in the past, in which everybody came through an American Majority training, had to pledge to do at least one thing moving forward for at least the next year, 18 months. And that's one of the things I want you guys to be thinking about. I'm going to write something down, and this is what my dad always told me. My dad was a very successful runner. You write down your goals. And you say, this is my goal for this month, maybe for next year, and you write it down. Because when you write it down, it almost becomes a contract with yourself. I've now written it down, I've stated it, I've put an actual number or a goal next to it, and I'm going to try and fulfill that. And that's one of the things that I would encourage all of you to do in regards to how do you bring real change in your community, in your state. Write down your goals and commit to it and see if you can accomplish it.
Absolutely. It's been very inspiring hearing from both of you. I mean, there's really no doubt that these are dark days right now, but it seems like there's a pretty clear path out of the mess if people are willing to fight, if people are willing to be involved, and we really appreciate your time coming here and explaining that path to us.
All right. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. You've been a great audience.
I can't let you leave here.
Okay.
You said something a few minutes ago that can't drop there. You said we have 23 trifecta states.
Right.
3 or 4 of them have passed election reform. We're not going to get them all. Why not? Trump had a trifecta in 16 and Paul Ryan backstabbed him and the Senate backstabbed him. He didn't get anything done and we got John McCain to approve Obamacare. Why don't we get the trifecta states cleared for the 22?
Well, we've got about 11 states that have already done something. I've only mentioned the 3, but there's about 11 states of those 23 that have already done election reform. My hope is that in the next session in 2022, we'll get the next 11 or 12 to do something. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get something done in most of those states. But I think we all understand, too, not all Republicans are created equal, right? Just because there's an R next to their name doesn't actually mean they're conservative, doesn't mean they actually have the courage to do the right thing. So you encounter that all the time in D.C., which I would argue is part of one of our real problems, where
By the way-
there's a distinct lack of political courage with many Republicans in D.C., and it would be really nice if more Trumps showed up and fought.
And just to fire you up, the Department of Justice has gone after all of those states, saying that those election changes that they made are voter suppression. So it's almost like the government has declared war on its citizens.
I mean, and that is part of the problem. You have to have people that are willing to step up and say, I'm willing to take on the DOJ.
And there isn't really anything more fundamental. We all have different issues that we're interested in, whatever it might be, right? It's a target-rich environment. But if we lose free and fair elections in this country, it's over. So we can't let that happen.
Question, election boards, how they get on election boards?
You mean
Ballot boards.
ballot boards? You get hired, and we can follow up with you. You need to be trained. You can't just walk in there. There's a process. So I'll follow up with everybody who's here if you're interested. Part of it is just making sure that your city clerk and your county auditors know who you are. You have to develop a relationship. You have to be on a list. There is a process to go through. So that's part of what American Majority is doing here in Minnesota, and there's ample opportunities to be part of those trainings. So,
Absolutely.
you're welcome.
Any other last-minute takers? One more.
What?
We'll do one more.
Just the names of your staff people, so how do you get hold of those?
Well, do we want to?
Lonnie at AmericanMajority.org, and it's Jennifer at AmericanMajority.org. But
Yeah.
they're here, so
Right.
Lonnie's here. Where did Jennifer just run off to? But yeah, business cards at the back. We've got an American Majority table. Grab their business cards, connect with them.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much, everybody, for turning up. We really
Wait.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
You good?
Oh.
One more question. All right, one more
Okay,
question.
okay. We'll do one more.
We can follow up. Yeah, Fox News attacked the video and said that it wasn't true. He's talking about the ballot harvesting that was going on in Minneapolis that was caught on tape. Fox 9 News attacked that report and said that they hadn't gotten it right. Hennepin County Attorney's official position is there is no voter fraud in Minnesota. And he's sticking to it.
3 people showed up on election day to vote in Cedar Riverside. 3 physical people showed up to vote on election day. Ballot harvesting.
Yeah.
That
All right,
whole
we are
situation's a
officially
nightmare.
done.
We are
Thank you so
officially-
much
yeah.
for coming
Thank
tonight.
you.
Really appreciate it.
We'll come out and chat.